Our second speaker is Sarah Curtis. Sarah Curtis is professor of history at San Francisco State University. Dr. Curtis has received an NEH fellowship and been a Fulbright Research Scholar. Her most recent book, Civilizing Habits, Women Missionaries and the Revival of French Empire, was published by Oxford University Press in 2010 and won the Francis Richardson Keller Sierra Prize for the best monograph from the Western Association of Women Historians. It's a great book and so influential for me. Her talk today is from her current project, which she has entitled Small Worlds, The Culture of Childhood in 19th Century France. And this talk is La Poupée Modèle, Girls and Their Dolls in Fin de Siècle France.
Thank you, Jen. Excuse me. So La Poupée Modèle, whose cover you see here, was the title of a magazine published from 1863 until 1924 as an offshoot of the Journal des Demoiselles, who marketed for the younger sisters of their subscribers. And I have another slide that shows you its origins in the fashion magazine industry. It was one of the longest lasting of the doll magazines that proliferated in the second half of the 19th century. These magazines provided young girls with stories, advice, patterns, recipes, and games, all focused on dolls. And indeed, the very first article was written in the voice of a doll, Conseil d'une vieille poupée, who wrote an editorial in nearly every issue. The self-described purpose of the magazine was, quote, at once a book of instruction and amusement, close quote, initiating young girls into, quote, various kinds of housework. More diverting to its subscribers, perhaps, were the supplements that included patterns, paper dolls in their clothes, that's what you see here, and cut-out buildings such as a theater or a palace. Over the course of an annual subscription, a girl could sew a wardrobe and construct an entire scene in which she could play with her doll. And here we have a bedroom with a little pocket doll that could be purchased, that was sold by the magazine. La Poupée Modèle, like other similar magazines, also offered a doll for sale. There's the small one here, but also this is a larger model. Many dolls in the 19th century seem to be named Lily for reasons I don't know. And the size of the doll, of course, just fit the patterns that were in the magazine. This magazine and its sisters were the tip of the iceberg in the category that I'm calling doll literature in the second half of the 19th century. In addition to the magazines, girls could consume stories and books featuring dolls and their owners as protagonists, starting with Sophie de Renneville's Conversation d'une jeune fille avec sa poupée, published in 1817. That's a very early example, followed by, I don't have a slide of this, but Julie Goreau's Mémoire d'une poupée in 1839. But after that, there's just a whole flood of books like this. Even books for girls that were not explicitly about dolls often included important scenes of girls playing with dolls, such as the Comtesse de Ségol's Les Petites Filles Modèles, first published in 1858. And there was even an adult alphabet book that girls could use to learn their alphabet. In these books, dolls came to life, they learned to read and write, they got into trouble, they changed owners, and they wrote memoirs and letters. And I included this example just to show you on the left there, you have the girl and her doll who has suddenly started to walk. And the dolls are, as I'll discuss in more detail in a few minutes, remarkably animate in these books. Dolls in these stories were sometimes, excuse me, models to imitate, but more often they had faults that needed correction. This doll, wrote Jules Barrac in L'Éducation de la Poupée in 1857, was, quote, was truly marvelous. She talked, walked, saw, understood, ate, in a word, used all her limbs and all her senses like a natural person, but all her education was to come, close quote. In this book, as in many, the mother of the doll owner, the mother of the girl, warned her daughter, however, that she would first have to correct her own faults before she could impart those lessons to the doll. So it's in educating the doll that the girl herself becomes educated. The not-so-hidden message of all this doll literature was to provide lessons in domesticity and morals to young girls through the education of their dolls. And L'Éducation de la Poupée was the title of no fewer than 3 separate books. And there may be actually more lurking out there with that particular title. The preface to Mémoire d'une Poupée of 1839, a fictional tale of the adventures of a doll named Vermeille, suggested that it would be a work in the mold of educational treatises dating back to Fénelon. Because dolls represented self, how girls played with their dolls was, quote, a faithful mirror of their own experiences. This is still the author of Mémoire d'une Poupée. Quote, happy is the man who, looking for his life companion, can choose among those whom he used to hear chatting with their dolls, close quote. Please, what is a doll? Asked Hippolyte Rigaud. Quote, it is neither a thing nor an object. It's a person. It's the child of the child, half the education of the little girl in this charming maternal comedy that she acts out to her benefit, close quote. And indeed, through lessons and punishments, the girl in Barrique's story cures her doll of vanity, gluttony, illiteracy, laziness, disobedience, and lying. I have a few images. This is just one of her taking care of her doll. So actually proper care of the doll, not leaving it neglected, dressing it every morning, putting it to bed. That's part of the domesticity. Here the doll, she's trying to teach the doll to read and write, but the disobedient doll is sneaking out to play. And this, she gets punished twice in this book, but this is the one where she's forced to wear this sign on her back where she is mocked by all the other dolls, which is finally the lesson that penetrates into her. And then finally, I'm sorry, in this one she is asking forgiveness of her mother, the doll owner. And then finally she's rewarded with a doll of her own, who, quote, in similar hands could not fail to be well raised, so she was, like her mother and grandmother, the model of all future, present, and past dolls, close quote. So one of the things that interests me about this project is also the ability to combine the literature with some of the material culture. And there's a lot of material by doll enthusiasts out there on the changes in the doll. I'm just going to give you a tiny snippet of it. There are technological innovations in doll making in the 19th century that make them more lifelike and less expensive. In the early and mid-19th century, the French doll was modeled after a mature woman, a fashion plate who advertised French style. And these adult dolls, sometimes called parisiennes, sold with or without clothing, provided opportunities for girls to learn to sew and continued in popularity throughout the century. So this doll never actually goes out of fashion. But in the second half of the century, doll manufacturers began to compete to produce more realistic and more complex dolls for a growing market. And this is a bébé jumeau, which is one of the baby dolls. And those are dolls with the bodies of babies or young girls. A baby doll or a bébé is not necessarily a baby. It might be a young girl. And they had porcelain heads, expressive eyes, small mouths with slight smiles, realistic wigs, and fully movable arms and legs. They sometimes had voice mechanisms, so they could say a few words as well. And here's also a slide of an advertisement for a doll that walks. One department store advertised a swimming doll. Now, dolls in storybooks have possessed the ability to walk and talk, sometimes in the presence of their owners, sometimes secretly when their owners were asleep or away, for some time. But in some ways, the technology is finally catching up with the stories. The heroine of Bouchancourt in 1882 the author wrote of the heroine, I am a modern doll. Of course it is to the progress of mechanical science that I owe the flexibility of my limbs, my uncertain speech, my movements full of a grace unknown to my predecessors. And so dolls proliferated in the advertisements. Most of mine are drawn from department stores. So for Christmas of 1881, this is from the Christmas New Year's catalog, the Samaritaine department store's least expensive doll was the Bébé Chéri. It's right up here, with movable limbs and a swivel head at 2 francs 90. And its most expensive was the doll here, a 36 centimeter, quote, doll of top quality kid leather satin costume for 16 francs 50. Both in reality and in the doll literature, there was a class hierarchy of dolls determined by their materials, their features, and their accessories. And in this book, which features stories of 7 dolls, as the title indicates, this is an 1869 publication. One of the dolls was a self-described Parisian doll born in an elegant toy store on the Boulevard des Italiens. She was not displayed in the window, according to the story, because she might fade, but in, quote, an elegant box with her rich and elegant wardrobe arranged around her. She's bought by a duchess, whose daughter then sends her back to the merchant to have her eyes changed from unfashionable blue to trendy brown in the story. And actually, the girls who are very high in the social scale and are very coquettish with their dolls are not really approved of by the doll writers. But the same book also had told the story of an Alsatian doll, quote, one of those common dolls that are sold for 25 sous in all the little shops in Strasbourg, close quote. Throughout the century, commentators agreed that girls were instinctively drawn to doll play and used it to imitate their future adult roles. Quote, if the little girl has a mother too occupied with the care of her appearance, Madame Capin warned, quote, she will torment everyone around her to possess ribbons, feathers, new flowers, and to change her doll's accessories constantly, close quote. In 1865, La Gazette de la Poupée, which is another one of these doll magazines, describing a bonus gift of a doll's room and furniture to subscribers, emphasized both the elegance inspired by the doll itself, but also, quote, the love of order and domesticity that makes good housewives. And an article published in Le Temps in 1888 traced the interest in baby dolls to a new focus on children after the Franco-Prussian War. Parents were, quote, more worried about raising a generation armed for life in the battle for duty. Instead of the doll in crinoline, the courtesan of the Second Empire, girls wanted dolls that could press against their hearts, warm with their fervor, hold in their arms at all hours, wake up, put to bed, and dress, close quote. The inaugural issue, in fact, of La Poupée Modèle emphasized that its subscribers would learn how to become, quote, good little girls, polite and friendly, and little model housewives, close quote. So strong was the influence of dolls that critics like Domesticity, like Madeleine Pelletier, attributed the same influence to them, recommending that they be banned from girls' play because they reinforced girls' roles as homemakers. So, but one of the things I want to argue is that doll stories provided more than model behavior and the correction of faults, because most of them were structured to have some dynamic in the narrative around doll travels and adventures, sometimes accidental or unanticipated, that contrasted excuse me, with a placid and obedient life at home. And in this book, La Poupée de Bébé of 1878, Lily, the doll given to Madeleine in the story, after serving in the first half of the book as a corrective to her owner's behavior, she's stolen in the Tuileries garden by a street urchin who sells her to the owner of a puppet theater on the Champs-Élysées, where she's transformed into a marionette. She's then sold to a spoiled girl in the countryside, given away to an invalid friend, sold in a lottery to 2 girls who break her arm in a tug of war, and finally is dropped in the forest where, by a remarkable coincidence, she is found by Madeleine's sœur de lait, and then she is finally reunited with, quote, her little mother, and the rest of her life is calm and tranquil. Order is restored, but one imagines readers captivated by the dangers that Lily faces. Some dolls are never reunited with their owners, usually finding better, less neglectful owners, but occasionally they suffer permanent calamities, such as Flora in Malheur s'emparer d'une poupée en cire of 1864, whose wax head melts after being placed too close to the fire. Symbols of domesticity, and by their nature immobile, dolls prove themselves quite the contrary in many of these stories. And just quickly, 2 other slides from L'Éducation de la Poupée that you saw before. While the doll is out, misbehaving, she does open the door to the rabbit hutch, and then she has a lot of fun chasing the rabbits across the grass. That's a rather mild example compared to some others, but it's in an illustration, so I could show it to you, of the doll actually out having fun, which is sort of more interesting than when she's behaving herself. Although the authors are careful to provide appropriate moral lessons at the end, and partially melted Flora is placed in a cupboard where she can serve, quote, as a perpetual lesson of order, reason, and obedience, close quote. Many dolls prove considerably more adventuresome and mobile than the girls who own them. And so I'd like to think about the ways in which doll storybooks might have served as the feminine equivalent of the adventure stories read by their brothers. And then my final topic today is that dolls were also girls' entree into the consumer world. Not only could girls wish for one or more of the many models of dolls on sale, they could also long after doll clothes, accessories, and furniture. Although doll magazines provided patterns for doll clothes, and many doll stories described a girl sewing a trousseau for her newly acquired doll, doll clothes small in size were in fact actually quite difficult for young girls to fabricate. And that's a problem the magazines tacitly acknowledge, because they're forever suggesting that if the girl has trouble with the pattern, she should go ask her mother or her older sister for help. And in the doll stories, dolls usually arrive clothed, with a full wardrobe, often very sumptuous, provided for the doll as part of the original gift. And even the baby dolls are often very well clothed. As La Poupée Modèle explained in its inaugural issue of 1863, in the voice of a doll, quote, "We have our lingerie sellers, our fashion designers, our milliners, our decorators. There are stores that are devoted entirely to the superfluities necessary for a doll from a good house, as well as the most necessary articles for her grooming, brushes, soaps, sponges, rice powder, etc." Close quote. And dolls, of course, also had their own furniture. So here you see some advertisements from department store catalogs that show you all the things you can buy, starting in the 1880s. This one is 1904, the catalog from Magasin du Printemps. There you have a lot of very sumptuous dolls. Here's some of the furniture. Here's some of the clothing that could be bought separately. It really is American Girl all over again, you know. Here's some of the furniture. Is that my last? And this is a department store that caters to a lower social class. So the price points and presumably the quality of the dolls and the furnishings and clothing are lesser, but still they make a pretty important display. In La Poupée of 1860, the parents of Cécile rewarded her with a rosewood bed, a mirrored armor, 2 satin armchairs, and a mahogany table for her doll as a reward for trying to teach the doll how to write, count, and draw. At the Universal Exhibition of 1900, the doll furniture displays imitated furnishings then in vogue, quote, the Louis XV oak armoire and the Henri II buffet. But according to the writer of the report, the so-called conservative dolls had little taste for Art Nouveau furniture. The doll magazine in particular emphasized consumer goods. Of course, the magazine itself was a consumer good that needed to be regularly renewed, and a form at the back suggested that you could also give a gift subscription. But again, their origins in the fashion press meant that they encouraged continual consumption. They sold a lot of items themselves. And they also advertised specific examples in the guise of articles or chats between dolls. So for example, one of these chats recommended that girls could buy dolls and accessories at Le Grand Marché Parisien, which was, quote, an immense store located halfway in the Rue de Turbigo, halfway in the Rue Française, number 1, 2 steps from the Halles Centrales. So you even had directions to get there. They also provided a small Journal des Poupées to subscribers, which provided, quote, information on what the elegant Parisian dolls were wearing this spring and summer, close quote. The magazine had an ongoing relationship with one doll store called the Poupée de Nuremberg, as well as with suppliers of doll beds and chairs. And in the December of 1868 issue, there's an invented conversation between 4 dolls that shows the multiple messages that the magazine was trying to send. The dolls were sewing small presents for their petite mère, which was a very selfless thing to do, but then they started talking about gifts they wanted to receive. And so one of the dolls, Bluette, says she would be happy if she could only choose toys at 1 sou to decorate a tree for poor children. Frivoline wishes for a silk dress to replace one that is worn out, and the magazine helpfully provides the name and address of the store where such a dress could be obtained. But it is the doll Lolotte who expresses consumer desire at length. Quote, "I would like a pretty notebook with a lock and a case containing ink, stamps, a paper knife, envelopes, wax, a penknife, a pencil, and also paper marked with my initial. And next, a nice game of historic lotto to play in the evenings with my little brothers. And next, a magic lantern that I can display for them when they have been very good. And next, a silver tea set for my English doll," close quote. And then they go on to talk about various gifts at stores they had visited. So readers of La Poupée Modèle were certainly encouraged to think of others, but they were also allowed to indulge in consumer desires for themselves. And by the end of the 19th century, dolls themselves were a valuable industry for France, worth 5 million francs in 1900, up from just over 2 million in 1878. According to the report put out by the Ministry of Commerce after the 1900 exposition, hundreds of thousands of dolls remained important purveyors of Parisian fashion and style to the world. So I would argue that in doll play and literature, girls were training for adult lives as household consumers as much as they were learning lessons in acceptable feminine behavior and homemaking. The moral and domestic lessons of the doll literature are easy to spot, but they should be read in conjunction with the department store catalogs that advertise pages of dolls at all price points, as well as these clothes, furniture, and carriages that allow girls to create an entire imaginary world. And the doll magazines in particular straddle the line between moralizing and selling. Doll storybooks used dolls to teach girls how to behave, but they also featured sumptuous descriptions of the dolls, their clothes, and accoutrements that must have made many readers long after similar goods for themselves. Furthermore, the dolls in these stories got into scrapes that provided most of the dramatic narrative and interest. In escaping domestic control, they allowed the girls who read the story to indulge in vicarious adventures not open to them in real life. As an integral part of late 19th century girls' culture, dolls, more than other toys, reflected selfhood, serving as models for French girls in multiple ways. Thank you very much.